So, welcome everyone in the room and over at Zoom. Today we have Jill. We'll talk about organizational culture. Welcome.
All right, thank you. All right, hi everyone here and hi everyone online. If you haven't met me, I'm Jill. I'm from the Training Hub and I'm one of the scientific training officers. This is kind of like a reworking of some of the materials that I presented through a course a couple weeks ago, which was on organizational learning and culture. So you're going to get a really quick blast of some of the key principles that I presented through that. So you'll see that some of the slides, there are prompts that aren't usually part of the CSI kind of format, but you can just think about them and we will do the reflection as a group or individually if you're online as well. So without further ado, so what is organizational culture? It's the shared set of values, beliefs, behaviors, and norms that define how employees interact, work, and make decisions, and they act as the company's personality. So if you add like personification to your organization, who is that person? What are they like? And we can look at organizational culture through a few different lenses. And one of these is to look at like the values and beliefs that are held through the organization, what's important, how is information prioritized, how is the work done, what are the norms, and we can look at the behaviors as well. How are things done? What are the communications looking like? What are the dress codes or the approaches to collaboration? Are things very individual? Are they very group driven? What does the leadership look like in these kinds of circumstances as well? But we can also look at artifacts, so like the symbols of culture, looking at office layouts, logos, rituals, as part of being relatively new to Sweden and SciLife Lab. There's so many different aspects of the organization that like prioritizes retreats as ways to be able to bring people together. So this can also be included. And we can also look at leadership and structure. And these different ways of looking at leadership really affect all kinds of different things, from the psychological safety or lack of safety within an organization, the hiring practices, and again, the norms. So there are four main types of organizational cultures. We have clan culture. So you can think about this as very like business driven. This is or at least these examples are a lot of research around organizational culture and organizational learning comes from the business world. So, but you can see how these things apply to other settings as well. So in clan culture, we're looking at how collaboration unfolds. There's an emphasis on teamwork. Employees are involved. There's a lot of say that the individual has, and decisions are generally taken as a group. You can often kind of hear groups talking about like the work family that you have. Whereas in an autocracy culture, these are things like valuing innovation, creativity, adaptability, pivoting, taking new directions, taking bold risks, looking at that entrepreneurial spirit. Market culture, however, focuses on competitiveness, looking at achievement, results, satisfaction from customers, what your market share is. And then hierarchy culture is really about stability, control, efficiency, having clear rules and procedures and chains of command. So you can maybe take that out of the business world a little bit and look at military settings, for instance. These hierarchical cultures often have well-defined roles and responsibilities, and decision-making power is centralized from the top of the hierarchy. We can also look at a few different other types of organizational cultures. They're hybrid cultures, which are, taking a variety of these different aspects together at once. National cultures are really about ingrained values, beliefs, and practices that mirror the political and locational landscape. We also have industry cultures, which reflect norms, standards, and expectations, which are specific to a particular sector or field. So for those of you that are listening, wherever you might be, you could start to think about like what culture feels like it maps on to your experience of the workplace. And perhaps if you're have experienced a variety of different settings, think about how these might contrast as well. We can't ignore the power and politics behind organizational culture. We have to think about things like what decisions are made, by whom, and how, what input or lack of input exists to making those decisions, what choices are offered once a decision has been made, or lack of choice as well. And then what are the consequences of these decisions and how do they affect the organization and organizational members? So individuals and the organization as a whole might have very different experiences depending on how you segment the impacts. And then as such, we have to look at learning practices are embedded within these frames of power. How we learn, what we learn, the decisions made around such are all relative to the power and politics of an organization. And these will dictate things like the access that you have to being able to learn, to the time that is available, the resources that are allocated to such, the priorities of what is learned, and these may or may not reflect society as at large. So then we have to think about things like who is allowed to participate in these learning practices. Power determines what is valued as knowledge and what is not valued as well. And that knowledge and ideas will be reflected to different degrees about what is valued within the organization. These differences might be homogenous or they might be quite different, depending on how these different groups within an organization might experience them. So for instance, probably some of us might have experienced very different decision making and like outcomes and support from one department to the next. And even within the same organization, you might feel like almost a culture shock of that transition from moving from one place to another. Then we have to look at power structures from on a structural level. So centralized power structures concentrate the decision making. There's a clear hierarchy, and there's delegation to lower levels. Whereas decentralized powers tend to distribute the decision-making authority and responsibility throughout an organization, which empowers employees at different levels to different degrees. We can also have a variety of other structures like matrix structures. So these create reporting lines, which are complex webs of power, relationships, and accountabilities. So you could think about those two images here as some kind of combination of such that there's multiple connections throughout. We also have flat organizational structures, which tend to promote collaboration, and they reduce that power distance between those at the top and those that are like at the entry point to the organization. And network structures tend to rely on alliances, partnerships that are both inside and outside of the organization. And these can be much more blurred in terms of how they look and operate. You can also look at all of these things as individually descriptive, but often in practice, they can be quite blurry as well. So you might find that your organization takes from bits and pieces, or some feel more familiar than others, and you might find there's a combination of different aspects of it. This is, I know, a lot of text all at once, but I wanted to just have something where you could see like a contrast of different types of leadership styles. We'll focus on just a couple, but it's just so that you have everything available to you in one place. But we can look at leadership styles from in a variety of different ways: how hands-on they are, how hands-off they are, how collaborative they are versus individually made. We can look at each of them as having many pros and cons for different situations, but also leadership can change over time and the needs of the organization can change over time as well, which means that the leadership style that worked 5 or 10 years ago may not work at present, and may require different things. Any one of these takes a very individualistic approach as well, and you might find that in practice, decisions are made by, for instance, co-presidents or such, that there's not necessarily one person that is taking the decision. It might be co-led. So in any one of these, again, they're not discrete. Different aspects may be borrowed from at different times, and you might probably find that one takes precedence, but then you could say that other leadership styles are also true at the same time as well. So from the late P.E. Bourne, who was the founding dean of the School of Data Science in Virginia, so he one of his last publications before he passed away was about his reflections of like different levels of leadership that he had had. And he came up with a list of 10 different guiding principles that he felt brought success to the organizations that he worked for. These are not necessarily all discrete. Again, some of them might be more true at times than others. You might find that there's some contrast and contradictoriness to them as well. But I felt, and through the reflections that we had within the course that was put on recently, we had strong discussion around these and felt that generally that these had really held true. Then we have to talk about psychological safety as well, which is the belief that one will not be punished for or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, mistakes. In teams, it's about the teams believing that they can take risks without like punitive action taken to them. So this is a spectrum and can be, and different members can experience psychological safety to different degrees, even amongst the same team with the same leadership. But this is a guiding principle to organizational learning and organizational culture research around something that is very important to the spirit and the overall feelings of employee well-being and satisfaction and performance of the individual level, but also to the different group and higher levels of an organization. It's worth reflecting on what different aspects of psychological safety are especially important to you and that you see enacted within your teams, but also where there's opportunity for change or for growth as well. And also at times when something is inappropriate enough that you either have to take it to, outside of your team to have it solved. Linda, you're an expert on such as well, so I would highly encourage anybody who's participating today to look at other CSI sessions because Linda speaks on psychological safety quite often and the workshops are wonderful. So from this, we can do like a brief level of different conditions that create psychological safety. Inclusion safety is about acceptance, feeling like you're valued. It's about creating a sense of belonging and that no one feels excluded or marginalized. An important thing to note about psychological safety is that when something is positive, it doesn't necessarily mean that the opposite is like, or so if something is negatively affecting team members, it doesn't mean that the absence of such makes for psychological safety. So with that in mind, we can, again, like go through this list. So learner safety is about the freedom to be able to ask questions, to be able to make mistakes, to draw attention to having made mistakes and that you will be supported. This encourages a growth mindset, which we know builds resilience and persistence throughout career paths and learning journeys. We also have to acknowledge contributor safety, so people feel welcome to be able to share ideas, their opinions, that they can disagree without punishment, or they can agree as well, depending on the circumstance. There's no ridicule or criticism or like harsh judgment around this. Challenger safety is about the ability to go against the status quo. You can ask difficult questions, you can break from the norms, you can be that innovative or entrepreneurial spirit that is, contributing things that are very different from your team members. It's okay to disagree with your next level of management as well. But this is about like a mutual level to level respect for one another. And then finally, we have trust and open communication. This is through transparency, accountability, active listening, honest feedback. There's a very strong difference between critique for critique's sake and critique for the sake of growth and development. And this creates an environment where individuals feel comfortable sharing their thoughts, ideas, concerns. We also have clear expectations, supportive feedback, accepting mistakes, rewarding speaking up. We'll focus on supportive feedback as well, because this leads into the ideas of growth mindsets. This is about providing constructive feedback that supports the learning, individual, and the development, rather than blame or criticism being applied. And again, accepting mistakes, framing mistakes as learning opportunities, rather than a reflection of the individual as some form of failure. So we have 4 reflection questions for you. And for anyone that's online, you're welcome to contribute through the chat, or you're welcome to just think about these things. For the group, we will have a discussion together, but I want you to think about, what are the different organizational cultures that you've experienced? How did that influence your satisfaction and feeling of like well-being and ability to do your work to your best degree possible? We can look at, how do we evaluate the organizational culture that we are presently in? And how do we imagine our ideal organizational culture, to look at where there's room for growth? And then lastly, how can I implement strategies to foster positive organizational culture? Some of you might be in leadership positions, or may move to leadership positions as you progress throughout your career. And these are abiding principles that I think will help bring you and your team success. So with that, I think that we are close to the end of the time limit, and we'll move to the discussion now.